Hello, welcome to this sad day. And look how things are. Last week I made a video about the crisis in Switch emulation, and I saw some comments in Discord communities about questionable emulators, as if the crisis were only in my head. And what was our gift on Tuesday? The announcement of the end of Ryujinx, and that's what we'll talk about in today's video. Before explaining how things really happened, I can't help but mention a video I made about 2 to 3 months ago, where I said that Ryujinx was indeed receiving updates, but they weren't disclosing the real improvements because they feared that Nintendo would do something to them, just like it did with Yuzu. However, in the last few days, they posted a series of games that had execution issues, showing improvements almost in the week of release, like Castlevania Dominus Collection, which couldn't maintain 20 FPS on launch day, and Lollipop Chainsaw, which, despite having a poor port for all platforms, was receiving many improvements and I imagine, would soon be playable decently. Ryujinx was the emulator that, even without major performance advancements, always fixed new and old games, serving as a basis for Sudachi and other emulators to implement their fixes. But from now on, things won't be like that anymore. On Monday, Nintendo contacted GDK-chan, one of the leads of Ryujinx, and it seems he received a cease and desist order, being instructed to dissolve the organization and dispose of all Ryujinx-related assets he controls. The other developers were waiting for confirmation if he would accept the agreement when the organization was suddenly dissolved. After that, they already knew what GDK-chan's response would be. For those who don't know, a cease and desist order is issued whenever a company, like Nintendo, is dissatisfied with how you are handling a game or material that is part of their intellectual property. Normally, they do this with Pokemon mods and other games to ensure they never see the light of day. Would you have the courage to risk everything for a little game? I imagine most here wouldn't. But as I said at the beginning, Ryujinx had several unannounced improvements. It was said that there was already a functional version of Ryujinx for iOS that worked very well, using a memory mode to bypass the restrictions of iOS, which the developers themselves considered absurd. However, there was still no user interface, and since Apple does not allow JIT recompilers in its store, this version was never released. The devs claimed that Apple's hardware is amazing, but surrounded by absurd restrictions, like the limitation on recompilers. There was also a functional version for Android, which had a user interface, but due to issues with drivers and the operating system, that project wasn't ready for public release. The Ryujinx team wanted to avoid headaches with the Android emulation community, so they decided to improve the project for a later release, with enhancements. On the other hand, one of the developers, Isaac, was working intensely on the graphics API for macOS, called Metal, and his version was close to completion, showing better performance than Vulkan, even in its early state. The developer Barry was trying to bring LDN, which is the private LAN mod for Ryujinx, to online gaming on private servers. Additionally, there were successful experiments connecting an emulator running on the Steam Deck directly with a Switch over Wi-Fi. Imagine the precision the emulator needs to achieve such a feat. Unfortunately, I won't post parts of this video, as I'm afraid of attacks on the channel, as has happened in the past. But you can check directly on the Ryujinx Discord if you want. Finally, Perry leaves a reflection. Although it's uncertain if he will continue in the Switch emulation scene, he hopes other developers won't be discouraged. For those who remember when Yuzu stopped being developed, several other projects also ceased, like Drastic and others primarily on Android. He continues by saying that the future of game preservation depends on individuals, and perhaps one day this will be properly recognized. To contextualize, when we all expected Yuzu to fight in court against Nintendo and bring us a victory, we were all optimistic. This victory could change how laws are applied and show new devs how far they could go in terms of emulation. But with the withdrawal from the lawsuit, everything began to crumble, and we reached the current state where mere threats are enough to cancel projects and shut down YouTube channels that talk about handhelds, as has been reported. Is this the fear-filled world that remains for us? Or do we just need to wait for a hero to use justice to deal with Nintendo? Today, everything is a sea of uncertainties, and from my own experience, by the end of this month, you will likely see more projects heading down the same path. With that, it becomes clearer that the Nintendo Switch 2 will probably have very similar hardware and operating system to the Switch. What's really happening is that Nintendo is afraid their new console will be emulatable in its first year of life, which could affect sales. A large part of the audience might prefer to play titles on PC, in high resolution and with unlocked FPS, rather than on a new hybrid console, whose true potential we still don't know. This has happened before with Dolphin, which initially emulated the GameCube but quickly gained compatibility with the Wii due to structural similarities. Finally, I want to emphasize the importance of valuing the good memories that projects like Yuzu, Ryujinx, and other emulators have provided us. It's essential to appreciate those who work tirelessly, often without pay, 4 hours in front of their computers, programming incessantly to offer us free fun and the chance to experience new adventures. Without these developers, we might just be living another monotonous, hot day in front of the TV, letting time pass. Peace to all, and may a light emerge in this darkness that is becoming increasingly intense for preservation and emulation.